I'd like to welcome you to my garden consulting room. And before I answer the first question, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background, and that is that I was trained in America, and I came here about 15 years ago, and I've been working in the national health system ever since, the NHS. And the reason that this question is relevant to me is because I've had the privilege and honor of working with hundreds and hundreds of families through the NHS, and parents come in for a variety of reasons, but there are some parents that have real complex kids with special needs and multiple diagnoses and multiple disabilities, and so one can only imagine the stress that these parents are under on a daily basis. And in fact, they are often living in a state of survival. And we know that when we're constantly in that kind of fight-flight syndrome on a daily basis, that this causes a surge of hormones and chemicals released in our body, such as adrenaline and cortisone. And this can then lead to further psychiatric problems or psychological problems, as well as further diseases or illnesses in our body. So having taken level 1 and level 2 workshops with Dr. Joe Dispenza and reading his book called Evolve Your Brain and listening to CDs and watching the video, it became very clear to me that the work that I have done with myself personally and the breakthroughs that I have been so phenomenal that I became very passionate about wanting to share some of these principles and strategies and skills with the parents I work with. Unfortunately, I hear about this all the time in my work with families, and what you see is parents getting caught in these entrenched and repetitive patterns, the same dynamics that happen over and over again. And what's awesome is the fact that children actually are reinforced by these, and so what's happening is they may be getting an emotional charge or an emotional connection with their parents through these negative habitual dynamics, and I guess for some kids, negative attention is better than no attention at all. So there's a saying that children are like little live-in Zen masters, and that's because they continually push our buttons as parents over and over again. And so this is where we have to really learn to develop an emotional, social intelligence as parents so that we can role model that to our children. And what that looks like is to be able to regulate our emotions. But unfortunately, we get caught in this vicious cycle, and we could call this vicious cycle the law of associative memory. And that's because in our brains we have neurons that connect to billions of other neurons, and they build these gangs of neural networks. And according to Hebbian law, nerve cells that fire together wire together. And so this means that if we've experienced the same thoughts and the same belief systems and the same emotions that we've memorized on a body level so often, that it's going to create this stronger neural connection. And Dr. Joe often describes it as this hardwired phenomena. He says that a person can develop a mood, and then that mood turns into a temperament, and then that temperament turns into a personality, and then the personality becomes the person's reality and eventually their destiny. So that's why it's so important that we really understand how circuitry and chemistry is what can drive us to be stuck in these habitual patterns. So how does a parent change? Well, eventually parents do reach a bottom, or they come to a crossroads, or they have to make different choices, or they have an unfortunate wake-up call. And this could be something to do with themselves, or their family breaking down, or their spouse. But often it's about the child who becomes either disaffected and stops going to school, or has these massive explosive outbursts on a continuous basis, or it could be a child who's depressed or alienated. So many scenarios. And I'm not saying that it's the parent that has caused this problem. What I'm saying is that this is a time where new grounds can be made in terms of the parent becoming more conscious of what they're thinking, of what they're feeling, and how they're behaving. And it's a chance for them to look inward, inside themselves, and try to make things that have been previously unconscious, conscious. And there's something called the conscious competence model, and it comes in 4 stages, which I'll briefly explain. The first stage is the unconscious incompetent stage, where the parent or the person is really clueless about things that are happening in terms of their own participation, and they don't see their own deficiencies. For example, they could smack or yell at their child on a regular basis and not understand the harmful consequences of this. But eventually, like I say, there's a wake-up call, and the parent then may start to actually look into various reasons for these things happening. And it could be that they start to reach out for help, or they start to read books and look things up on the internet, and really try to learn things from a theoretical standpoint or an intellectual standpoint, because knowledge probably is the first step. And then after that, they move into the 3rd stage, and this is the most important stage, because it's where a lot of the work takes place, and that is the conscious competence stage. And that's where parents are really focusing on what they're doing at home, and they're much more aware of their own thoughts and their feelings. And there's a method that Dr. Joe Dispenza has. It has to do with meditation, and in that meditation, the person learns to form these to do these mental rehearsals, in which they're actually taking their body to a place where the body thinks that they're actually doing this in real life. And we know that in research, Olympic sports players do this kind of visualization, mental rehearsal, and people that play instruments can do it without actually even playing an instrument. So there's all kinds of strategies and skills to learn in this stage, and parents are becoming much more aware of their feedback loop and staying out of it. And so, basically, they're rewiring their brain, which is fantastic. And eventually, you will neurologically rewire hardware in place, so that you don't have to continue to practice it anymore, because it becomes so second nature. And this is when the skill reaches the unconscious part of our brain, namely the cerebellum. And Dr. Joe talks about the cerebellum being the doer, and the neocortex being the thinker. So when those two unify, or they become integrated, then you find that you're in this natural state of being. And for parents, that means that it's just becomes second nature to think and act and respond in a different way. And so what would that look like? It could be that a parent learns to listen and become much more aware of being with their child as opposed to being distracted, or they could be communicating in a different way. They could show that child that they have a greater understanding of what that child is feeling, and so that's about connection and attachment. They could be learning to even disconnect from their child when it's appropriate. So all these things are they're so rewarding to see when you put in that bit of work that you need to do, which, I'm not saying is easy. It does take a lot of commitment and a lot of motivation, but it's well worth it in the long run. So this is a very important question because it has to do with self-regulation. And I'm going to begin with a definition from Dr. Dan Siegel. And it goes like this: the mind is an embodied process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So we know that emotions are on an energy level, and if we think of the thoughts being the language of the brain and the feelings being the language of the body, then we can see how the mind then creates feelings, and then our thoughts create feelings, and then our feelings create thoughts, and then in the long run we see that feelings then become the means of thinking. And so parents have to really learn to decrease their refractory period of negative emotion. Now, it's okay to feel emotions. In fact, it's natural that a parent who has a child with a condition such as autism would feel, a sense of loss and grief. And other parents who take their child out in public may feel a sense of shame when people stare at them and look at them with disgusted looks, because their child might be having a horrific meltdown. So we have to remember that we have a highly developed part of our brain called the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, and it's so important to be able to use it. For example, we need to regulate our emotions, and that's where that process comes from. I love this saying by Viktor Frankl, who was a Nazi concentration camp survivor, and he said that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space wherein lies your freedom and power. And I say this a lot to my parents that I work with, because it's so true that unless they really stop and pause and observe themselves and observe their child and then make a choice about how they're going to respond, their life is not going to be working in the way that it could if they're really connected to their child in a different way. So one of the things that is helpful is to ask sort of these frontal lobe questions. For example, how can I be more patient with my child? How can I keep up my energy during the day? How can I take care of myself? What do I and who do I want to be today? What kind of emotions do I want to show today that are from a state of being elevated and being uplifted, as opposed to being worn down in that survival state? So, it is so great to see parents when they start to get into these more high frequency emotions such as joy and forgiveness and gratitude. It really makes a difference in their lives and in the lives of their children. And so I just wanted to end with saying that tonight or this afternoon there's going to be a rainstorm. At least that's what the weather forecast has predicted. And what is really awesome is that we can actually have our own weather forecast that we're in control of, and that's when we begin to think and feel and behave from the inside out. So what this means basically is that we are actually in control of ourselves, and it is our feelings and our thoughts that can be greater than the environment.